like bright red.
Have I seen what, John? Sorry.
The images out of people from California of people, it literally looks the entire, like everything looks bright red, like lit under a bright LED light or something. It literally looks.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
It looked like that last night here. I mean, you can't really tell in this picture, but the sky is legit orange right now.
Yeah, you can. Right now you can. It depends on what you do with the lighting.
It's like
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm in my car today. There's too much. It sucks being outside too long because I start to get nauseous and my head hurts.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
So
just smoke. Are you guys
relatively unreal?
Are you guys free? Not a threat, but of imminent fire.
Yeah, we're not. It would take a new fire starting near us, which is what we're afraid of now, for us to get an evacuation order. But people south of us by an hour or so are, a couple hours south. And then west of us, it's pretty wild. But our power's out. They turned a bunch of the power lines off around here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I was talking about one time. Like 2 years ago, it was PG&E out in California that one of their power lines started the fire. So they shut off everyone's power without telling them. But hopefully they told people this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We didn't get any word. It's been off since yesterday.
So Lisa was born in Spokane, Washington, and their folks lived in a little town in what's called Palouse country, that part of the region. And she's born in a little town named Spangle. And just south of Spangle is a town called Rosalia. And just south of Rosalia is a town, what's its name? Begins with an M, M-A, something. It's escaping me at this moment. But they only had 200-300 people live in the town, but the entire town burned down. Just about every structure in the town, out of nowhere. Just a crazy brush fire. And there are a lot. It's remarkable. Washington is having a fire year also. It would be all over the national news, and it sort of is, but it pales compared to the number of acres burning in California. I think Washington has got maybe a quarter of the acreage burned in California, something like that.
Yeah. I was just hearing about a town.
It's a lot hotter and drier down there.
Yeah. I was hearing about a town of like 8,000 people or something in which 80% of the homes have burned down. Like, it's just gone. Kind of insane. But yeah, it was particularly the scale of the fires. I don't remember exactly, but I thought I read that this is already the largest like square mileage burned ever in a fire season, and the fire season is just starting, which is kind of insane.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty amazing. It's like, really, it's a combination of climate change and poor forest management. I mean, it's really there's a great TED Talk by Paul Hesburgh on forest management that I recommend. I should link to that. But did you meet Paul Hesburgh, Uncle Tom, when you were out here?
Oh, I did more than meet him. I spent a lot of time with Paul.
You were friends with. A lot of time. He has a TED Talk. Did you know that?
I've heard that, and I haven't seen it yet.
Is it TEDx?
The TEDx, yeah. I'll look for it.
TEDx, I think. Yeah. But, yeah. Ed and I just talked about it a lot today, just the sort of things we need to be doing on a large scale to prevent things like this. So the reality is our forests are way too young and way too thick out here. Our fuel loads are way too high. And we don't build fire breaks into our forests in any sort of effective way. So things need to change, or this is just going to get worse and worse. But it's going to require a lot of learning and thoughtfulness to actually pull something off that would make a difference. Yeah. The magnitude seems so incredible that it's like, what are you even supposed to do about a problem like this? But you got to start doing something else, because this is ridiculous.
Well, you got to have some.
I mean, it looks like the end times out here. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's literally like a dark sky all day. It's dark here, and the sky is orange and red. It's like, where are the demons at? You know?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well,
yeah, there was some when the fires were super bad, probably 2 years ago, I think, when it killed a bunch of people in Paradise, California. Trump criticized California for not raking or something. I don't remember the exact criticism. It had to do with clearing the lower levels of forest using rakes, and they weren't doing that anymore because of environmental regulations or something. But I do remember people kind of scoffed at his criticism, but he did have one.
Yeah, the thing is we do know how fires work. Like, fire science is really well developed. Like, we've gotten much, much better at fighting fires in the last 30, 40 years. And we know the behavior of fires out here, and we know what could prevent them and make them burn much less efficiently, where to put fire breaks, how old our forests need to be. Like, we have the answers. To the information we need to solve these problems is there. It's just not in short-term profit. The incentives aren't there, or at least aren't obviously there, despite the fact that hundreds of thousands of acres are burning. But the short-term profits aren't there.
Is it mostly farms burning or public land? Or private land, I guess.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to matter that. It shouldn't matter that much, the answer to that question.
Well, if it was like public land or government land, then it'd be like, all right, we need to have the government spend a bunch of money to try and fix this. But if it was all private land and farms that just had a bunch of trees on them, then at some level it would be up to them to keep up to code, and obviously the government to check in on them. But
yeah,
well, the government does in lots of other areas. They certainly, I mean, I don't know a ton about this. I know because our family's got a farm in Spokane, a number of families. I know that the government is involved in crop rotation and setting acres aside, in wetland prevention, or wetland erosion prevention, all kinds of things like that. So it's not as if the government can't get involved or doesn't have a mechanism for getting involved. It's just got to have a coherent set of aims.
yeah,
I don't know that we have the will to work out coherent set of aims. I hope that's wrong in some agency or another. Maybe that's not the problem. JP, let me just ask you this question, since you're kind of up on this stuff, it seems. My understanding was that the forests evolved as fire fire forests, ecosystems that depended upon fire moving through them periodically when no one was around to put them out or call the brush or et cetera, manage them. And part of a healthy ecosystem, put it this way, were it the case, hypothetically, right? Were it the case that a healthy ecosystem depended on letting them burn, presumably in some controlled kind of ways, but letting them burn. If that were the case, we wouldn't be trying to prevent forest fires. We'd be trying to manage them.
Yeah.
Such a system.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Yeah, it would be the best place to get to out here would be a place where we could do prescribed burns, where basically we could control when the fires burned and what areas they burned. That'd be really good for the forest. And the reason we can't do things like that is because our rotation age is so young, meaning we only let forests get to like 35 to 40 years old, and they're not managed very actively through then. And it's all monocrops. It's all Doug fir. It's all, and so, like a natural forest, you wouldn't have something like that. You'd have, 20% hardwoods and 20% meadows, and then 60% just conifer trees. That could be a way that worked. But throughout, my understanding is out here, like fir, there weren't just like massive fir forests in a lot of these areas. Like that's a pretty artificial thing. I forget exactly the phrase, but fir is, I think it's called an expeditionary species. That might not be quite right. But basically after a fire burns through, firs grow really quickly relative to other species. And so they sort of get out ahead of everything and get really big and tall. But as a forest reaches a sort of steady state condition, there really aren't very many fir trees out here. It's much more oak and particularly cedar. Cedar and hemlock are the two climax conifer species out here, meaning those are the most common tree in an old forest at steady state. And that's because it basically creates shade. They're shade tolerant trees. But what you have happen is you have bigger trees, you have more diversity, and you have greener forests. And all those things contribute to just, less fire danger. And then just periodic fires will go through, but they're not going to get as hot and they're not going to cover as much ground as they do now, due to just the massive swaths of basically unmanaged monoculture Doug fir stands with fuel loads that are just through the roof. And you combine that with a drought and a hard wind, you get what you have right now. And yeah.
Thanks for that.
It's, yeah.
John Rose, I kind of stuffed that question in a minute ago. You had something else. We were both chewing on the line at the same time. Do you have in mind?
I heard recently that in the past, I don't know how long ago, but Native Americans used to do prescribed burns, to use your term, and then I think the U.S. government made them stop doing that. Or maybe
that's absolutely the case, especially in this area where we are right now in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. Like this area used to be mostly oak savanna, so that's only a few oak trees per acre. And yeah, the natives would do prescribed burns in that area all the time. I mean, I don't know the rotation, but it was a super common practice in this area for sure to basically manage the savanna.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like a good idea, but I think it would just be a pretty big question about like liability would probably be a huge problem. I don't know exactly what a prescribed burn would look like, but in the current conditions where everything is so dry and like the burn could just get so out of control, and then if the government does it on purpose and then burns down a bunch of people's houses, can they sue the government for millions of dollars? Like,
oh yeah, we're not even close to in a position to be able to do prescribed burns. Not even close. Yeah. Yeah, you'd have to do them at different times of the year. You'd have to do it in a completely different forest.
Okay, so so right
now
now it's just so out of control that even starting a fire at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No, prescribed burn right now, you might be able to get away with it at a particular time of the season in a particular forest.
Well, what's the
that was particularly manageable.
Is it to clear cut everything and start a new forest again with a more natural initial spread if that can be done?
No, I think the answer is long-term forestry, which means stand ages of 100 to 200 years old, with managed thinning. And I don't know enough about fires, the basically science of fire prevention, but my understanding is there's lots of techniques that they use to build fire lines and build fire breaks in places that will actually slow the fire down as much as possible and get it back down to being a ground fire. And so I think what it looks like is, longer rotation ages, much longer, thinning the forest, allowing a significant percentage of hardwoods, so maples and alder, particularly in this area, and then also putting using meadows and roads as fire breaks in basically the most effective positions according to whatever aspect, the topography and aspect of the land. And that would make a huge difference with regards to fires getting this big and this hot and spreading this quickly. If people adopted practices like that on a large scale, you just wouldn't see fires this hot. They wouldn't be enough fuel. But there's millions of acres, so
Yeah.
It's a long-term thing. And I don't know how they would, I don't know how a big corporation with millions of acres, they'd have to just totally change their business strategy. Like corporate forest management would totally change.
Yeah, I assume it would have to be government subsidies would be the only way to actually do it well or efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Eventually,
or fines.
Eventually, it's hard to say. It's like the reality is hundreds of thousands of acres are burning. It's like eventually you got to change something, Yeah. I just hope there isn't I just wonder, what I hope is the opposite isn't true, which is, these people are totally mismanaging their forests and managing them totally irresponsibly. And then I hope those people aren't getting subsidized by the government when they're,
well, yeah, you'd have to get subsidized to have a meadow.
I don't know
do this or cut down a huge strand of trees,
Yep.
say the fire line or something. But
Yeah.
Giving subsidies to people who aren't gonna use it would be a disaster. But
Well, you got subsidies, you got fines, and you got incentives.
Yeah.
Those, I think, were surely subsidies incentivized, but I think there are other kinds of incentives besides subsidies. There's regulatory incentives where there's a clear path forward in one direction, but all kinds of crap in the other. And you can, so that's not slapping fines on people, but it is changing the cost structure. What would that look like? Incentivizing a company. I don't know what this looks like, so I'm making it up. But incentivizing a company or a whole industry so that a kind of social business model has got to be adopted in effect. There's got to be it's got to work with federal agencies. It's got to work with state agencies. No doubt this happens now to some extent. Rather than maximize the profit of its shareholders, it's got to produce these outcomes, as they say, sometimes a triple bottom line, right? Where there's some social good, there's some return on investment, and there's some benefit for the employees that work. It seems to me some sort of change like that has to happen, it's one way to do that is through regulation. That seems to be very differently than government's going now. The EPA's the tenor of the current administration is to count the numbers of rollbacks of regulations, right? I mean, at one point, if I remember correctly, just putting in a raw number. What was the number? Was it something like you had to cut back on a third of your regulations? I don't care what they were. That was quite a while ago, so those numbers escape me. But anyway, you could craft. Seems to me you can shape by regulation that way. I'm thinking of the way energy incentives are done. So you can put that, cap and trade. If I've got the language right. Cap and trade, where rather than just
carbon tax.
Yeah, that's right. Instead of, in effect, incentivizing lots of carbon emission by leaving in place a structure in which it's just free to throw it up in the air, right? And God knows who has to clean up after it, but not you. Right? Instead of doing that, you measure everything that's thrown up and you put a cost on it, and you can trade. You can buy, in effect, the rights to pollute more, but you putting market incentives on the reduction of emissions. That is a kind of shaping through incentives. And you're not necessarily fining people, and you're not necessarily paying them, say, to let their land lie fallow, or you're not just throwing profit. You're not just giving them the same profit a different way. You might make it much harder for industries to make money in this space. But guess what? If you want to make money, it's got to be this way. And you sort of steer it through some combination of incentives. Cap and trade is one example, I think.
Yeah. But so I think a big question I'm coming to right now is like, what is most of this land that's burning? Because that totally makes a difference in the type of regulation or policies you want to put in place. Like, is it like mostly private land, or is it government land? Like that totally changes the conversation on how to approach it.
It's a big mix. And it varies in different places.
Okay.
So those are almost true from first principles. If you just look at a map of the national forests, you find out it's a big mix, right? There's a lot of government-owned land.
Yeah.
JP, you must, if that's true in your area, you must know of government forests within driving distance of where you are.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We're all over the place.
And you must know about industry, big industry forests. I know you do because you've planted some.
We're surrounded by those. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a number of people like yourselves.
Yeah.
Not also so uncommon, right?
Yeah. There's a few. Yeah. It's pretty uncommon. There aren't a lot of small farms like ours, but
Is that right? Okay.
in the grand scheme of things, yeah, very few.
Have they, did they used to be more and they've sort of sold out to big companies?
Yeah.
Is that the way it's gone?
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, is my understanding. Yep.
Okay. That's way agriculture's gone everywhere.
Yeah.
More
Get big or get out. Right. Yeah. Well, it's just timberland is worth so much. It's hard not to, as you move from generation to generation, it's hard not to just sell out, just not to cash out, Like if this farm that your family managed is worth $20 million and you don't really want to be a tree farmer,
yes,
you could just sell it to Weyerhaeuser and walk away with money and do what you want with your life. So it's sort of, yeah, over time that's going to happen,
right.
just more and more.
So do you have an impression of whether anyone is doing basically anything to try and combat this from happening every single year? Like, are there private companies doing it, or does it have to be like this massive change that incorporates private, big business, small business, the government, and the only way to really make a dent in this problem is just by like pretty widespread change?
Well, I think the only way to make a dent in the problem, I think what it comes down to is what is the government going to do, and then what are the big corporations going to do? Because they own 90% of the land. That's like burning. Like our family owns 800 acres. Like, we can manage our forest perfectly, but we're right next to Weyerhaeuser, and they have 3,000 acres right there, and it's all a tinderbox. And so it's like and then the government owns hundreds of thousands of acres. Bureau of Land Management has tons of, and they have different goals with their management, and but it's just the scale is totally different.
Yeah.
We could do, and we are doing what we can to make our farm as fire resistant as possible. But it's just it's a drop in the ocean of all the. So it's hard to imagine anything making a really big difference unless the government and large corporations do something about it. Just given the share of the share of the problem that's theirs. That's
Why not pass laws that make industry responsible for all damages, no matter whose they are? In other words, turn them into an insurance company as part of their business model.
Yeah.
Either that or sell the land out, big corporations, sell it to us, the government, we'll buy it at this price. Right? And we'll be the insurance company, or else you do it. I don't know how that would be divided up and how you determine liability, but
Yeah.
we do things like that. We have, I'm thinking of, say, what's it like to have no fault insurance come into a state? That's a big change in the way insurance happens. Basically says, if you want to drive a car, right, you're going to pay for any accident that happens, you're going to pay a share of it. No fault.
Oh.
And that's what we in Michigan, I think Michigan might be a no fault state, but I take that back if it's not true.
I think that's right.
I think they are.
So, I mean, that's a pretty big change. But it's not like California makes changes like that all the time, right? California decides that such and such is known to the state of California to cause cancer, and they slap product warning labels on everything, or they want a certain curriculum taught in schools, and boom, now all of a sudden, if you want to sell something in California, it's got to meet these standards. And that's big enough. And of course, the automakers don't like that now because of a famous case right now. And the Trump administration doesn't like California because of it, right? Because they're big enough to impact the market. So it's not like states can't do big things like that. What if California did that?
Yeah.
Or what if, there may be challenges, but it's hard to imagine. I mean, think of the massive social costs. What are the health costs that you all are bearing, breathing the air that you're breathing?
Yeah.
What are the livelihood risks that you're all bearing? And those are free to Weyerhaeuser, right? Don't mean to pick on them in particular, but they might be the biggest.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true.
Yeah, and they do business and you pay for it. And why not change that? This is a sort of a big government. It's an example of how big government might. I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? As Ronald, I even got a little Ronald Reagan imitation in the back of my sentence there. But that, the scariest words in Washington, as he put it back then. But I listened to Noam Chomsky recently reflect on those words of Ronald Reagan, right? And his take on that is, that's right. Remove the process, right, from responsiveness to the people, right? And throw it into the political realm where the richest people have the most political influence and the poorest people have almost no political influence at all. Right? Yep. Instead of one person, one vote influence. And so Chomsky wasn't a big fan of that Reagan revolution, right? He thought it was the opposite of free behavior. It was oligarchic behavior. Anyway, that's all that's the background against which we have to make decisions like this. How do you manage?
Yeah.
Until we get that right, and until we stop spitting at each other, election cycle after election cycle, which means constantly, right, at the national level every 2 years, which is all the time. And until we get that right, how do we fix our gaze on any long-term social goal and pursue it?
Yeah.
We seem to suck at that right now. We seem to suck as bad as we ever have. So the skies there are burning.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I could be just totally making this up right now, but my impression is that private enterprise has basically gotten worse and worse at focusing on long-term benefit and long-term solutions. It's just all like it might have always been that way, but I think it's gotten worse and worse. And just focusing on the most immediate profits, I think there's a lot of examples of that. But that is what makes private enterprise even worse at fixing these big problems that conservatives might argue that the free market is the best at solving, which is an argument, but I think they're even worse than they used to be because of this intense focus on just making the quick buck.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is interesting to hear what Chomsky's framing of like big government being more like something that's actually responsible or responsive to the people. I just feel like it's such a like I don't know, it almost seems like a foreign concept to me in some ways, where it's like, anyway, that's just not often how I've thought about the world. I've thought about the government as, just this sort of separate entity that's just sort of doing things that it does. I don't know. The essential connection between the will of the people and the government, I think, is hard to keep in mind. And it's also not always obvious, and it's manipulated to not do the will of the people sometimes. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a second and see if I can pull up an image real quick here in the background. I have a graphic, which a single graphic can do is raise a question. But let me see if I can find it. I think I know where to look. The problem is it may be in a file that's too large, and I may not know how to look for it. Well, I'm close. But yeah, let's move on. Maybe I'm not going to find it. But so I'll make it up. Imagine the graphic said the following. Imagine let's see what's plotted against what. What's the question is the general topic is how much money do you need to have in order for what you want to have happen politically to stand a bat's chance in hell, right? How much money do you need to have, or does how much money you have impact how likely your preferences are to see the political light of day? That's the general question that this graphic addresses. And it's something like, if you're in the bottom 90% of the income earners, the correlation between your political preferences and what happens politically, I'll call it zero, right? Which of course is wrong, but I'm oversimplifying here because I'm making a plot up, right? And then when you get to 90% or 95% or whatever some threshold is, it's way down there on the percentage of people. It's at the top 5%, the top 1%. I don't know where it is. Okay. All of a sudden there's a very steep cliff, right? Where there's zero correlation between the things you prefer and the things that happen politically. versus a very high correlation if you have a lot of money, right? Now, I'm not sure I've thought through that quickly enough here. I have a plot like that where somebody thought it through a little bit more carefully, and all it could do, even if I had such a plot, where's it from? Where's the statistics from? What are the assumptions? Who's the author? Over what time frame? Right? We'd have a bazillion questions about it, but it raises the question. Even that idea of to what extent do we actually live in a democracy where it's one person, one vote, or is it $1, one vote? And then you need a different name for that form of government, right? And I think oligarchy is the name that's often thrown out around that. $1, one vote. The question is, how much money do you have? And you can buy basically what it is that you want. And if you have an enormous amount of money, there's a very high chance that you're going to get what you want. And if you have almost no money, and that's almost everyone, right? If you share my view of how money's stacked up, that almost everyone has none, and they don't get what they want. And if that's the case, then we don't actually live in a democracy. And Chomsky's, you could swing that question right back to whether it's to Chomsky or to someone who thinks like him and says, look, let's get government to solve problems. And the challenge to that then would be the only people who get government outcomes that they want. The government outcomes are responsive to rich people's preferences, not to people's preferences. They're responsible to dollars, not to votes.
Yeah.
And if that were true, how would that change the landscape here in terms of getting anything done? What would you have to do? Persuade enough rich people?
Yeah. Yeah, well, in the situation you just lined out, that's absolutely what you need to do. You need to convince the majority shareholders of Weyerhaeuser to change the way they do forestry. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a view of the world that I've been thinking about for a while, but there is, I mean, also, I think the one, well, before I go there, that's also why rising wealth inequality is such a huge problem, even though people like to say a rising tide lifts all boats, stuff like that. If the simple fact is that wealth inequality is growing and we have a system where more dollars equals more power, then that will tilt the system even more. So that's why, I mean, one of the many reasons that wealth inequality is a huge problem. But who was the Democratic billionaire who just ran for
Bloomberg?
Bloomberg, yeah. So, I mean, he might be, I think, I hesitate to call America an oligarchy. I mean, this is just one simple example, but I think the entirety of the Donald Trump media war chest has like $300 or $400 million left in it. And Bloomberg could basically have spent, and he did spend $1 billion, like he's spending billions of dollars, and he could have spent billions more. And that's in comparison to Donald Trump and the Republicans' favorite candidate. So, I mean, there is certainly a level of power that the people still have. And I mean, wealth can't buy you anything. So it is just one example, but I certainly am not. Maybe we don't have a true democracy, but I'm never comfortable saying we have like an oligarchy either.
Why not? Just because there's rich people on both sides, maybe I'm not listening careful enough. So come back and help me understand the reason for not being comfortable. If you may have a multi-party system, call it a two-party system, and you may have very wealthy people on different sides of that fight spending their dollars. But how does that not make it ruled by the dollar, ruled by people insofar as they have money, not ruled by people insofar as they have votes?
I mean, I just think there's a ton of examples of the power of the people surpassing the power of the dollar. I mean, AOC she got a bunch of donations, but she certainly defeated the establishment candidate who had a bunch more money to start, at least. Mm-hmm. And there are examples like that.
Do you have any idea how much was spent on her campaign versus the other side? I actually don't.
I don't know. But it's also just like in a democracy, you certainly want to limit the amount of power that money exercises over the system, but it's never going to go away entirely. And just because it gets pretty bad, I think doesn't mean you can just not call it a democracy anymore. And I think we're just like, it's really bad right now and almost impossibly bad. But I mean, I think it means something when you call like the United States an oligarchy or a dictatorship. Like, and I just don't think we're there.
Got it. Yeah, I would want to throw those terms around more carefully than I wouldn't. Dictatorship and oligarchy are very different.
Yeah, I'm just talking about terms that people throw around, and it's like, I mean, you can use these words to describe the direction we're going, but I think it's different to just say now we're an oligarchy. Sorry, guys.
Shouldn't we measure it somehow? I mean, in order to find out where on that spectrum we are, shouldn't we come up with some criteria? I'm not saying I have those criteria or am justified in drawing a line in one place rather than another. That's not my point.
Yeah, we certainly should. And if we were going to compare whether we were more democracy or more an oligarchy, I guess maybe we could come up with the idea that if we were more democracy, it would be one vote counts as one weight, and an oligarchy would be that the dollar outweighs the vote by a certain extent. But
does it have to outweigh it in public, or can it outweigh it in private? So suppose it's the case that you can buy ads. Suppose you can persuade people, and there's an art of persuading people. It's based on big data and and hundreds of parameters per person. Call this the Cambridge Analytica world,
mm-hmm.
right? Because this is what they advertise, the power they advertised as having, right? So if that were the case, then ad buys.
Is that part of the oligarchic system, or
ad buys? That's right. Ad buys in that environment where everybody can vote the way they want, but how they want is in fact statistically a function of how dollars are spent. Very high correlation.
So yeah, I mean, I think we might already just be past this. I bet everyone is doing something similar to what Cambridge Analytica did. But yeah, that would be an example of wealth and technology corrupting the system. But I mean, I would never say you shouldn't allow political ads, or you shouldn't be allowed to spend pretty much whatever amount of money you want on political ads. Maybe you could regulate how the ads can appear or something, but even then that would be regulating free speech. But even in the most free and open democracy, you should be able to buy political ads however you want.
Yeah, I wonder it'd be fun for you to make that case. Why would that be wrong? Why would it be wrong to put limits on how much money you as an individual or you as a corporation can spend? You won't be arrested for saying things in the street, but you will be arrested for outbuying the other person's microphone, right? So that you're the only one who can be heard, or nearly the only one who can be heard, because you're shouting so loud over that other guy. And you might say, you know, free speech doesn't mean no limits on anything that has anything to do with speech. It means it means we really will foster an environment where ideas get a free, a wide range of ideas get to be considered. No range of ideas are out of bounds because of the kinds of ideas that they are. So there's no prohibition on the kinds of things that could be said. But there is a prohibition on how often, how loud, and on, basically that, on how much energy you can put into the amplification of your ideas.
So I forget if I just talked to John about this or if I mentioned it on the podcast as well, but I looked up the fairness doctrine a while ago. And one of the main reasons for its implementation was, I forget the exact term, but something similar to frequency scarcity. Basically, as all the citizens in the United States started getting access to radios, there weren't that many stations that they could turn to. So right. The United States government was concerned, like, wow, this could be a problem if a small group of a businessman just bought up all the stations and every single person could, the only information everyone had access to was just what this rich person who bought all 6 stations put on the airwaves. And the reason it eventually the reason they eventually got rid of it, and the reason it never applied to print media either, was because there became so many different options. Like, someone could spend $1 billion a month advertising, but there's also a billion other places to go get your news. So if that's the case, it would be hard to say to limit someone in that way, because they're not controlling all the information. They're just, using their money to try and reach as many people as possible. But those people could always go somewhere else if they wanted. It gets more concerning when every single local news station is getting bought up by the same media conglomerate, and they're all saying the same thing. I don't know if you've ever seen that YouTube video where it starts off with a newscaster and then it goes until every 50 local stations are all saying the exact same phrases. And it just increases one by one. And it's pretty creepy. And that's because there's one media conglomerate that owns hundreds of local news stations, and they basically gave them a script and they all had to say the same thing.
Right.
But
the video, but I know the backstory to it.
Yeah. So, there are examples where I think money corrupts in that sense, but approaching it from the other sense, I think people can always go find information somewhere else. You can't drown someone out really anymore.
Let's see. That seems, I guess I don't get what you say, why you'd say that. It seems to me you can drown someone out. And the analogy is something like this. any three people who want to can hold a little caucus. They can have a little group. They can set up their, they can have time on the street, and they can attract anybody who wants. I have in mind the Iowa caucuses, right, where people are milling around, talking to each other, et cetera. So we'll have a caucus situation. We've all sort of seen that, especially this year. We got to watch it before the debacle of the vote count, more than we've ever seen it. So yeah, you can do that, and any candidate can get in there. Lots and lots of them anyway, right? Only one of them is allowed to give out $1,000 bills to everybody who comes over. Moreover, they're allowed to shout their message with as much megaphone, and here we'd have to come up with to twist the story somehow. They're allowed to invest in electronic countermeasures, right, to de-amplify other people's stuff. After all, this is about speech. This is the amplification of speech, and you're entitled. If people really want, they can come closer and listen to you, right? No one's keeping them from doing it, and nobody's putting their dollars in to promote the kind of speech that they want to promote. And so it's all free speech. And so I get to give out money to people, and I get to drown out the opposition, but they're there and they can say whatever they want, and they're there in plurality. And
so was the example the $1,000, the amplification of voice, or the shutting down their speech using electronic countermeasures?
I'm lumping all together, perhaps unfairly, at least to try to establish one possibility. And that possibility is the mere fact that no one arrests you for saying what you want to say, and you get to go find it if you can find it, right? And there's lots of them out there. It doesn't follow from that it's a fair game. It doesn't follow from that the freedom that we're granting actually does advance the intellectual character of the conversation, the free exchange of ideas. In fact, that freedom might inhibit the free exchange of ideas and I listed a whole bunch of different ways it might do that to try to stack one case in which I thought it would be pretty obvious, right? That if you're one of those other people, you're SOL. Your message is not going to take off.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly using electronic interference to stop the other person's microphone would not be allowed. I mean,
so why can't I spend my money that way? Isn't it?
Is there
keep me from acting the way I want to act in a way that promotes my message? I'm not stopping their message. I'm just overwhelming you on the radio. I'm just giving you 4,000 targeted Facebook ads a day because I own all the information about how people like you, what people like you click on, read, follow, and I have an overwhelming advantage of other people who want to get into that space. Overwhelming advantage with my money and the know-how that money buys. Aren't the cases very similar, in fact?
So, I mean, I don't really think so, because I would compare stopping out someone else's microphone with working with like shutting down their website or something. You can't do that. Like, if someone wants to target me with 1 million Facebook ads, maybe not. I could just be like, I'm not sure I like these ads. I'm going to go look at the YouTube personality that I get my news from.
Is it illegal for me to spend money hiring lawyers to challenge people in court so that they all of a sudden face a mountain of litigation costs? Or is that exactly the way politics is practiced now?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not ideal, and I think it gets less and less ideal.
Then why permit it? Why confuse the promotion of free speech, which is meant to contribute to a free exchange of ideas with other kinds of actions which only get smuggled in under free speech, but which do not promote the free exchange of ideas. They do precisely the opposite.
I mean, if someone wanted to give me $1,000 to go listen to them speak or watch their ad, I would probably go do it. And then I would take their money and walk away. I mean, I'm fine. Like, it seems shady, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know.
I just don't know why we have to put up with that in our political process. I mean, make the case, right? Make the case. That's what I guess I'm asking anybody to do. Make the case for why we need to ensure that corporations, for example, can spend as much money as they want because they're protected by the constitutional free speech, by the First Amendment. Why? Why should we interpret the First Amendment that way? Why not interpret the First Amendment as meant to encourage informed voting?
Yeah. And so if what we might be getting at, which is something like Citizens United, my low level understanding of that is that I don't really agree with it. I think at some point there should be limits on political spending, but specifically applying to ads, I don't know if that's what Citizens United was about. I thought that was most like you could always have private citizens running ads. It doesn't. I thought Citizens United was mostly about allowing basically unlimited funds from corporations to get donated to political campaigns in one sense or another.
Right. I think you're right. Although I haven't gone back and looked at any detail at all. That's my case too.
So yeah, I think I definitely have a problem with political campaigns having unlimited funds to spend. I think largely because that inevitably drowns out people who don't have infinite money. Okay. But I'm always going to be fine with a private citizen running whatever ads they want or using their money in general to promote their point of view.
Why does a private citizen get that license when, say, a corporation doesn't or a political entity? Why do you draw the distinction between them?
I think a big reason would be only the political organizations that had a bunch of money would ever have any chance of success, which is the case.
So that's the reason why prohibit political organizations from spending as much money as they want. But wouldn't that also impact, suppose that political organization just said, okay, I can't spend that money, but you, my friend, right, you very wealthy private individual, you can spend all that money on our behalf, right? And we will work together for a state of affairs which brings about a set of outcomes that you're really in favor of. Just tell us what they are, right?
So in general, I think
that pony all the way to victory.
In general, I think it probably is really problematic to allow that. I just think we're basically going to have to draw the line at political speech then, and it's really hard to say what exactly is and isn't political speech and what you can promote your advertise on. And if we're saying you only can spend a certain amount of money on political speech, and then the government's going to be able to determine what political speech is for private citizens, then that's concerning to me.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Because you could imagine that turns into, we should go both ways with that, actually. What would be wrong with this problem? What would be wrong with those lines moving away from political speech and into other areas? what would be wrong with them? I mean, that's one way to go, is sort of to bite the bullet, right? And say, gosh, you're pointing to a difficult problem of discerning the difference. So let's just imagine we can't. That's one way to respond and see how bad that gets. And the other way to go is to say, no, there is a way to make that distinction, right? And there are some lines we could draw.
So I think we can draw lines. I just never want the government to be the one drawing the lines for that case. And for the other case, it would basically apply to, what are we talking about exactly? Spending money on advertising. Sure. We would have to limit every private citizen to the amount of money that they could spend on advertising anything.
Yes, that's right.
Interesting.
We would say that the airwaves are common space, and you can't grab more than a certain share of it.
I think I would go back to the point I brought up with the fairness doctrine, is that could have made sense to me at one point, but it doesn't anymore because people can always go anywhere else. And it's not like you can't even grab like a percentage of the airwaves, maybe on like the major media networks, but you're never grabbing a percentage of the internet's attention or something like that. Like there is always a billion other places to go.
A billion other places to go, but not a billion other places that are gone in significant number, right? I mean, imagine you said, if you crack the top 100, I'm utterly making this up, so no reason to think this is a plausible solution, but it's a direction. Put a number out, call it 100, call it 1,000, something we can actually measure.
There's only a certain amount of places where most of the internet's attention goes.
And this is in that top 1,000, you may not buy more influence than this, directly or indirectly.
Do you measure influence?
This is common space. It's not oligarchic space. This is common space, right? And you may not buy more than, and now maybe 1,000 is the wrong number, right? Or not necessarily. You may not buy more than 1,000,000th of it. You may not buy more than 1,000,000,000th of it, of this top 1,000 accessed outlets, something like that, so that you just don't get to buy that much. There's an enforced, very, very rich plurality, such that it's very difficult. This is moving quite far away from a two-party system and toward a very many, not necessarily, but a two-party spirit, right? It's against, he said, she said, red state, blue state.
So do we have ideas that people can only buy a percentage of, or can a private citizen who's advocating for pro-life ideas only buy this percentage, and then once those are bought up, no other pro-life person can buy that? It seems to me to get regulated so quickly.
Yeah, that's you're right. It's not going to be easy. I mean, we have similar regulations right now, right? Individuals can only put so much money into a political campaign. What's the number? Is it $6,000 or something like that comes to mind? Right? We have all kinds of loopholes around it, and yet that is an intensely regulated space, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who could put.
Yeah, and so the same way we don't want a private citizen donating $1 billion to a campaign, we don't want a private citizen being able to buy $1 billion worth of ads on Facebook.
And we make it difficult, let's suppose. Sorry, are we together still? I must have hit something. Now I can no longer see it. There you are. Yeah. We make it difficult somehow to get around We don't count a corporation as a single person. We count, we individuate people by the amount of money that they spend. Any entity that organizes and spends a certain amount of money, you can have lots of uncoordinated, right? We do actually require people not to coordinate on certain things, right? We have anti-monopoly rules, and you cannot corner the market, right, by colluding to raise prices together. And that's even on this, even you 3 local gas merchants. I'm talking about on a city street, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not as if we never take such measures. Why not take such measures with regard to buying advertising space? Yeah, I've gone on too long here, but I just don't see why we have to make that behavior sacrosanct as this is speech, and we don't regulate speech. It seems to me we're doing exactly the opposite of what we mean to do. The reason we should have speech.
The difference is it's really easy to tell people that you can't all get together and come up with an unfair price to keep the market unfairly high, but it's much harder to tell people you can't come together or separately or otherwise and promote similar ideas. Even if you're doing it for different reasons, to different extremes, to different extents, it just seems much more difficult. And I mean, difficulty shouldn't.
Would you agree if it weren't more difficult, if we could find measures that were not difficult to put in place? You can't seek LLC protection. You can't seek not-for-profit protection for activities in the political sphere larger than a certain dollar spend per year. For example, I'm trying to pick something that's small, that's sort of a one-time fix where it could have a big implication, because all of a sudden now people would not be able to hide behind a limited liability or something like that. I don't know whether that would work. That's just pull it out of my rabbit's hat, so to speak, right? But if there were such fixes that were simple.
Yeah, but I think that is my problem, is that when I just don't think it is simple. I think it is, like, in a perfect world, I think we would be able to limit it, but I think we just it will have to end up infringing on people's free speech to an extent that I'm uncomfortable with, I think, is the only way I could imagine it actually being effective.
Okay. Well, you made a great case. I guess all I can say is I hope that you're wrong, both about what can be done that you'd be comfortable with, because what you're comfortable with is a pretty rational measure, right? So I wouldn't want to leave you out of the political solution, so to speak. Yeah. So I hope there are simple solutions that actually look like they do.
Could you even imagine what? Could you even imagine what one of those solutions would look like?
Well, I just too quickly imagined some. Not only are there restrictions on what an individual can spend, but there's restrictions on what any non-profit entity, and maybe there's more to say than they can't be non-profit. Maybe there's, whether they're profit or not, say a limited liability entity is sort of like a non-profit entity. It's a different kind of protection, right? In one case, you protect against taxes. In the other case, you protect against suits. But the government sets up, the law sets up, right, these kinds of entities. and you could try to systematically deprive big steamrollers full of money from those protections and say, no, you're going to have to work a whole lot harder than that. You're going to have to actually persuade a lot of individuals to act independently of one another.
Or
in order
just
to
start
do
up a
corporate
bunch of smaller organizations.
For sure, you'd have to start a whole lot more small ones. That's right. That, like I say, just make it more difficult. There's always edge cases to any law. You're not going to be able to stamp out everything. People will find, in effect, countermeasures in the law.
Right.
I get that, and that's fine. But I'm just trying to move the mean, right? I'm just trying
But
to
then
shape.
it could, once they start trying to get around the law and they start forming all these smaller organizations where the law doesn't apply, then that's how you get into just stifling anyone who organizes anything, because that's how everyone else operates, is through these smaller organizations. And so the regulations of the corporations would start extending to everyone once you tried to fix the next problem.
Yeah, but you're marching me down a slippery slope and I have to go down, right? I'm saying let's take several cuts at it. We already take several cuts at it, right? We already put limits on individual contributions. That's a cut.
Yeah.
Right? We already regulate certain kinds. In theory, there are donors have to be identified, for example, in some areas. That's a cut. Right? We have laws like that. It's just that we have areas, big areas, where you get to go around those laws, and the net result is, if you have a lot of money, you can spend it in any way you want, in a way which it's hard to argue actually promotes the free exchange of ideas. It seems like it undercuts what our First Amendment right is for. And that went way too fast. But if, insofar as we thought something like that were true, I guess I'm arguing for trying to find ways that make it more difficult to do that, much more difficult to do it, and to promote real push it closer to individuals who actually have to think through complex issues and vote. And they can bring other people, they can persuade other people, but it's got to stay fairly near to the grassroots, and it can't be organized in a big corporate structure from the top down, paid for by the dollars of very few to move the very many. Yeah, I think that's our biggest danger now.
Yeah.
We ought to fight.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I'm already in agreement a lot of the way in that. I mean, I think Citizens United is a huge disaster because it basically just allows unlimited political spending, it seems. But yeah, I guess I haven't really figured out exactly how far down I want to go in the regulation.
Yeah. Well, me neither. So this is good. We both got some work to do, and now we have a better idea of where to look to do it.
Yeah, I mean, a big problem is like I actually don't. I've spent some time, or I haven't spent that much time looking into what Citizens United actually is. I just kind of have a broad idea of it. I don't know why it exists or how people would get around it if it didn't exist, if it would make things that much different if it didn't exist. Because then it gets into just finance and how people get around regulation and stuff like that.
Yeah, let's look for a really good article. Somebody somewhere's got a good primer on this stuff. It would be nice to look at a few of those, maybe from a couple of different points of view. Just as a start to get a little better informed, because it does seem like, what do we even hope for politically?
Yeah. So if we both are already in agree or think that Citizens United shouldn't be a thing, do we move? Is the next step down, limiting the amount that private individuals can spend on political activities? Is that the next step?
Sure, we already do that, don't we?
Well, we do in donations to political campaigns. We don't with someone buying a bunch of ads on Facebook, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's made there. I don't know the campaign law well enough.
I think it would be.
It
Well,
gets in the weeds, right? Something of value is the phrase that gets used in the porn star disputes, right? I mean, Michael Cohen's in jail for something, or was, right? He was convicted for something.
Oh, yeah, that. Yeah.
And that was failing to disclose something obtained of value on behalf of the campaign, right? Something like that. So I'm suggesting that we'd have to take a look at the details of what's illegal now, right? And why,
Yeah.
whether it's worth anything, without trying to rewrite the whole law. It would want to get some sort of feel a little bit deeper than our current lack of familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
And see what kinds of measures can be taken. And then develop some sympathy for laws that move in those general directions, right? Having some understanding of the dangers and the safeguards against those dangers for each of these. And that doesn't sound to me like an endless pass down. That sounds like a good college course, or something like that, or reading for a bit, but not reading forever, not becoming necessarily. Because we're not trying to propose the craft of individual laws. We're just trying to understand the contours. Just to have a general opinion as to whether our limits on spending money now are ridiculous, and or whether they are. We may not like them, but the alternatives may be worse.
Mm.
So we should understand whether we think that's the case. What are the alternatives? Need they be worse? Anyway, thanks for chewing on that. So, Pete, thanks for your patience.
That was a good conversation.
You should have the last word if you want it. We didn't give you a lot of space in the last 20 minutes or 30 or whatever it was.
I don't have a last word.
Gotcha. We can continue at another time.
Things are burning out here.
Yeah. All right.
That's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, stay safe. We'll hook up again. I'll show you a slide. I put together a few slides. Here's my favorite slide. We'll go through this next time. This is I've tried to assemble we've had a conversation about this 3-lens matrix and how to put it together and how to map it. And I've tried to put a resource list together, not so much a resource list in the sense of references, but resources in terms of ideas for each of these 3 lenses. And then I've done a little bit more by way of mapping. I tried a 3D mapping environment, moved from our mind mapping environment in 2D to something similar. Imagine grabbing the sphere and turning it around, and you could have endless things sort of stuck on here, and then sphere relating to sphere, and you could navigate your way through a world in sort of a gaming environment that exists. I've also grabbed a site, which I've got to start. It's in my hands to start it, which will get me a 70% discount on the software, so we could all play with it if we wanted to. It's not prohibitively expensive, but I'd rather pay 30% and not 100% for good purposes. I also went and looked at what MATLAB can do and other sorts of, we could step outside and sort of use mapping capabilities in other environments, perhaps. This was actually a Trinity student written GUI here, graphic user interface in MATLAB, which you both sort of recognize. And anyway, somewhere in that space, we could map some of this stuff sometime down the road. So that's what I've been doing in my spare time. And we'll dive into these lenses, I'm hoping, one more time on Friday, and then see if we can come up with some sort of mapping direction. So that's what's next. Since I have it sitting there, I thought I'd show you.
Cool.
Okay. Well, thanks. JP, enjoy dinner. And John Rose, have a good evening.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.